you so much for popping in. A couple of things that I do want to let you know, and I appreciate the kind words from Catherine. I have been doing this for quite a while, and I would like to say that I know a pretty fair bit when it comes to Azure. I will also tell you out of the box that there is nobody who knows everything about Azure. So here's what we do. I'm going to commit to you a couple of things. First of all, every question that you put in the Q&A, and by the way, if you have a question, go ahead and pop it in the Q&A. Every question that you put in the Q&A that I've got the answer to, I will give it to you right away. I am not going to give you an answer, though, that I'm not comfortable with. So the cool thing about the Q&A is that we can always go back to it later. And one thing I will commit to you is, you're online, we've got contact information. I will get that answer back to you. I like 100%. My hope is I'm going to answer every question. But as I also said, there's no one that knows everything about Azure. So do not hesitate to throw some questions in there. And again, the best way to do that is if you look at the Zoom interface, you've got the little Q&A section that you can open up. Just open it up, pop in a question, and I will answer it. Otherwise, I am going to just stand here staring at the camera, and it's probably going to get a little bit creepy. So hit me up with those questions, and let's get rolling. I also, while you're putting those questions in there, I have to apologize. Somebody has what can only be described as the loudest leaf blower I've ever heard running outside, and I don't think there's anywhere in my house where I can hide from that noise. So hopefully that's not too much of a distraction for you, but I do apologize for that. And I promise it's not me.
I can't hear a thing, Tracy, except you. So we're all good. I do want to feed you a question from Facebook. As I mentioned, We're streaming live on Facebook. And so we've got a question there posted in the comments there. Awesome. This is from Andre Salazar. Is there a clear-cut path for networking only in Azure, or do you need general Azure admin to start poking on virtual networks in Azure infrastructure?
That is a great question. And I would say that what you need to get started on that is you need at least the foundations of cloud and the foundations of Azure, so that, when you are looking at that networking, you understand things like the basic ways of administering resources, because in Azure, like everything else, a network is a resource. So you don't need to go, deep down. You don't need to be an Azure architect. Frankly, you don't even need to be an Azure administrator if your focus is purely networking. But I would say, I would recommend at least getting that fundamentals or foundations understanding. And I will say, shameless plug for INE. We actually, in our starter pass right now, our starter pass for cloud is the Azure Fundamentals course. And not only does that cover the fundamentals, but it is designed to actually help you prepare for the AZ900. And I've gotten some feedback from students who, in fact, have done exactly that they have been able to actually pass their AZ900 based on going through our Azure Fundamentals course that, again, is available right now on the free INE Starter Pass. So if you're not registered with INE, if you don't have a subscription with us, you can start one up free. You could actually start studying for that AZ900, right? And then once you have that, which will, by the way, also introduce you a little bit to networking, but then I think that gives you that foundation to really pursue networking hard within the Azure environment. All right, I've got a question. Man, this is from this person, Lily Clark. I'm always a little suspect. No, actually, Lily Clark's fantastic. We have the pleasure of knowing her. The question is, what is the most effective way to get started studying Azure? The most cost-effective way to get started studying Azure on their platform. In terms of cost-effective, here's what I would recommend. If you have never registered with Azure, what you can do is you can actually create an Azure subscription for free. And what that's going to give you is a couple of things. And by the way, this is kind of consistent across the providers. It's going to give you 30 days and a $200 credit. I believe it's $200 credit now. That may change a little bit, but it's giving you a really substantial credit, and it's giving you 30 days in which to use that credit. So you can use that to create any resource you want. And I will tell you that is way more than enough to get your hands on and to get the feel for what you're doing at the fundamental level, okay? And my suggestion would be that in addition to getting that Azure subscription, trial subscription, seriously, pop over to INE, create a starter pass subscription, which is free there, and start going through some of our preparation material, right? And we have hands-on activities with our AZ900 preparation material. And so not only, can you go, you can get started prepping for free with us, you can get a trial account in Azure for free, right? But the material that we've got is going to give you hands-on. Now, look, I know this sounds absolutely shameless plug, and I don't mean it to be that way, but these are things that are free that I know of and that I know work. There are other free resources out there as well. So the most cost-effective way to get your start in Azure, to go back to that question, is to do it for free. All right. Now, I have another question, and this is from Mark Thompson. How much time is required to study and pass the AZ900 exam? That is a difficult question to answer because what is it that they say at a little disclaimer on advertisements? Your results may vary, and I will tell you, for me, it was pretty close to nothing as far as time dedicated to AZ900. But also, to be fair, I took that literally after I had taken the architecture a couple of times, passed it, just recerting on it. I'd taken the administrator and gotten that certification. I think I had the security certification too before I went and took the fundamentals. So for me, it was kind of zero, but that's not really fair. I would think if you're absolutely dedicating your time to it, I believe, just as a measure, kind of a measure of scope, I think we have somewhere around 18 to 20 hours worth of content on INE, and I would say probably expect to double that, right? And so I feel like if you put in 40 hours of prep time and you really were prepping efficiently, then you're going to be absolutely ready for it at that point. But again, that's I would say kind of that should be absolutely sufficient, and you may not need that much time to prepare, but block that out. The other thing I will say, and this is just from personal experience, it kind of depends on how concentrated your preparation is. In other words, like if you're doing 2 hours a week, it's going to take you more than 40 hours because you're just going to forget stuff, right? But if you're doing, an hour, 2 hours a night, and you're keeping up with it, then certainly within 40 hours. All right. Okay. From Facebook, how Azure is different from AWS and why it's benefit for me to choose Azure and how to start learning Azure from the very beginning. All right. A couple of great questions. How is Azure different than AWS? And typically this is where I'm going to say, well, it's simply better. But that's not really the case. Here's the thing. Okay, where in the long run the cloud is heading, and the analogy that I use is that it's headed towards being a car. Okay. And, there are different car vendors, right? You could go and you could get a Kia. I've got a Kia. I love my Kia. You could also go and you could get a Lexus or something else, right? There are differences between those cars, right? But they still are going to drive you to work the same way. And for me, in a lot of ways, that's where the cloud is heading, right? At a fundamental level, what AWS does and what Azure does is the same. Okay, they're providing, really, they're renting you resources, right? The end of the day, both of these companies have data centers, massive data centers all over the world, and they are going to be more than happy for you to rent some time in their data center. Now, it's more than that because they have this whole control layer built up, so that, you know, I can go in and I can use the web interface to spin up a virtual machine or spin up an EC2, or I could use programmatically, I can access it through an application programming interface or API. But what they do is they make it as easy as possible for you to do what you need to do in their environment. Now, there are differences. And what I would say generally, as far as, and this is someone in probably in 2 hours when Brooks is on, he's going to say, no, that guy was crazy for what he just said. What I will say is I feel that Azure's a little bit easier, okay? And, you know, the way that I explain it kind of working in both is that AWS is a little, I don't know if this analogy works for everybody, it's a little bit closer to the bone, in that, you know, you have more granular control over what you're doing in AWS, but you also then have to do a bit more, right? So, you know, if I'm setting up something complex, there's a decent possibility that I'm going to be able to do that in less steps in Azure than I might be able to do in AWS. Now, understand also, that's me coming in with 11 years of Azure experience and really hitting AWS fairly hard for 6 months to a year, okay? So that's a balance. So, you know, again, kind of getting back to that question, that's really what I would see as right now the primary difference. But again, the analogy I always use is think about a car, right? They're both well, they're not car manufacturers, but they're both cloud vendors. The cloud pretty much fundamentally does what it does. They just have slightly different takes on it. All right, now, hopefully that answered that. I do have, okay, so the question is, why would it benefit? Second part of that, why is it going to benefit you? That is actually a separate question. And so I get asked a lot, where should I go? Should I go into Azure? Should I go into AWS? Should I go into Google Cloud? All right, or somewhere else, right? And generally, probably the two you'll hear most often is AWS or Azure. And honestly, the answer is it depends. Okay. And if I'm looking at it from a career perspective, honestly, I kind of feel like right now, if you go either direction from a career standpoint, you're going to be perfectly fine. AWS has an absolutely massive market space as far as, you know, just how many organizations are in AWS. So how many different places having AWS skills is going to help you. They also, of course, have a very mature, market, right? And, you know, that I think if you go out there, you'll probably find more people who understand AWS. All right. Azure, on the other hand, also has a very large market space, right? You know, somewhere above, depending on, and again, these numbers are so completely meaningless, but depending on who you look to for your market share numbers, certainly over half of what AWS has, not half the cloud market, at least half of the market that AWS has. All right. So it's a big market. They also, quite frankly, have a really good channel program. So, you know, they're tied in very comfortably with a lot of very large corporations as far as their customer base. And so they're clearly not going away. You know, on the one hand, it is a little bit smaller. On the other hand, because it is a little smaller, it's growing a bit faster, meaning that there's lots of opportunities there. So I really think either one of those. I mean, Google Cloud, it is Google. And, you know, they are investing heavily. Google's taking losses right now because they are investing very heavily in Google Cloud. But I also say there's still some risk because they still have a fairly low market share. I don't think that risk is significant. And, you know, if they were the whole market and the market was their size, I'd be like, yeah, absolutely go to them. It's just there are two bigger players that are doing pretty well. So there's that. How to start learning Azure from the very beginning. I'm biased, but I've got a free resource for you. You can come on over, grab a starter pass at INE, and you can go through the Azure fundamentals preparation. It's going to give you what I think is a good foundation for Azure, and it's going to give you, you know, preparation if you want to take that certification exam. Okay. Now, great question. I see a couple other questions in chat that I believe came up first. Generally speaking, if you can pop your question in Q&A, that's going to work a little bit better, but I'll be happy to hit these. I've got a question from Mohammed on the chat. Can you suggest some places where we can study Azure Pin Testing? That is a great question. I will tell you, if you ask me that question in a few months, I'll have a very straight answer for you. And honestly, it's going to be INE. I will tell you, and I'm not going to give away any. I'm not going to make. This is not an announcement. And Catherine, if you're on, please, if you need to come in and caveat anything I say in a moment, feel free to do so. But we have a lot of work going into cloud cybersecurity right now at INE. We have courses that are in various stages of creation and production, and they will be coming out. Honestly, that's my best answer. And I will tell you, I am not a cybersecurity person. So I know that, there are some other places, but that probably have some content, but I can't vouch for any of that content. I know the people at INE that are putting the content together, and they scare me. So, which is pretty much the highest compliment I think I can pay to cybersecurity. So there you go. All right, now, okay, so here's a question coming in. Again, this is on chat. This is from Facebook. And yeah, that still came in slightly quicker. The question here is, I'm a network engineer and delve into the network side of Azure. I plan on doing fundamentals exam in a few weeks. Good. I'm not 100% sure if the Azure administrator exam would be worth it, as I would never deal with IoT, storage, etc. Role-based exam for network would be great. Okay, a couple things. One, fantastic. I think that's as I said at the outset, I think that's a great approach. As far as the Azure administrator, definitely take a look at the Azure administrator because it doesn't really talk. In fact, you know what? Let's bring that up. Here we're gonna take a quick look at. I have to move this. Okay, let's go AZ 104. By the way, I just put out a video that kind of goes through this. This is always the first step I take when I am prepping for a certification exam. Okay, and down here, skills measured. Go into some of the details for that. All right, I'll zoom in a bit on this. All right, so for the Azure Administrator exam, first thing you have here is identities and governance. So again, I know your focus is on network, the focus from the person that sent in the question, okay? But 15% of this is on identity and governance, okay? The 15 to 20% is on storage. We'll skip through that. 20 to 25% is on compute. Now, again, I'm not sure where you are as far as being strictly networking, but to me, networking and compute go hand in hand. So understanding the fundamentals of compute and how to manage that, I think personally is a good skill to have for someone who is avowedly primarily networking. All right, but that's 25%. All right, and then actually networking is the largest percentage. It's 25 to 30% of the overall exam. And furthermore, monitor and backup. Now, backup, not necessarily a huge thing, but I think understanding monitoring is very important, right? So take half of that, maybe we'll say, I'll be generous and say 10%, right? So really, at least 30 to 40 to 45% of the exam is right in line with what you would be wanting to do as a network engineer. Again, I'll make the argument that another 20-25% of that exam should be something you should be at least aware of from a networking perspective. So I think it's probably worth it. Also, just so you know, in terms of prep material right now, and we're undergoing a long-term shift in the way that we design our content at INE. But right now, and certainly for the foreseeable future, we have a learning path that is directly aligned with the AZ 104 exam. And frankly, even if you don't want to take the exam, it covers this content and it covers the administration of networking. Okay, so I mean, if that was the only thing you're interested in, you could still go in. It's on-demand content. You can pick that up. That is not available with the starter pass. We do have pretty reasonable subscription rates. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. So somebody just mentioned in the chat. Oh, before I go to that, we're going to go to the Q&A, because I do have 2 Q&A questions, and I asked you to put them in Q&A, and I got to give you what we have here. Oh, it is a very fun one. It is, what is Azure Kubernetes, and provide a use case example. Okay, so we're going to whiteboard a little bit. You're giving me the opportunity to whiteboard. Now, of course, I think I've got some things on here. So let's see here. We're going to zoom up really quickly because I was talking about this with someone else. There we go. All right, I'll get up there. Does not want to go up there. Okay, doesn't really matter. Weird. Here, we're just going to do this. Your canvas. Thank you. Okay. Quick 2 minute. I'm going to do this as fast as I've ever done it. Okay. Kubernetes is absolutely awesome. Here's the idea behind Kubernetes. I am a developer, and we'll go with blue today. Why not? All right. So I'm a developer, and I write this really cool application. Here's some code, right? The problem is I have to deploy that. Right. And anytime I'm deploying code to an environment, that means I need to have, some idea of the environment. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to say, you know what? I have heard of this thing called containers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an image based on that code of a container. And then I can take that image and I can create a container. This is my one problem with this tool. It always thinks my C's are O's. It's very strange and kind of frustrating. So C, you saw that. That was a C. Container, that's a C. Best I can do. Okay. Now, the cool thing about the container, other than the fact that I just struggled writing a C, is that I can take that container and deploy it literally anywhere. Okay. And I could literally spend an hour right now talking just about containers, but I won't do that. Fantastic concept, right? But that's kind of a point. What if you had an application that involved, let's say, a web front end, some services, different services, maybe even some kind of backend database, right? But you might need to scale this. I even need multiple scales of this. Okay. How are you going to do that? How are you going to orchestrate that? Well, in a very big picture sense, I could take this system known as Kubernetes, and I could say, you know what? I'm going to use Kubernetes. I'm just going to shove everything into Kubernetes, right? That's a little easier said than done, but that's the idea. And the thing is, then I have things like orchestration, scale, and all sorts of features that let me run enterprise applications at massive scale, right? I'm talking about thousands of instances of my web front end, thousands of instances of my services, multiple instances of my data backend, right? That data backend, it could be connected, should be connected to some kind of durable storage. all sorts of fun stuff. All of that made possible by Kubernetes. Kubernetes is also open source, and at this point, it's universal. We had a conversation with Neil Bridges. We talked about that a little bit. We talk about this a lot. The kind of concept of open source and what's the value and all that. And my point is, look, open source has won, right, in a lot of areas. They are the standard. Kubernetes is the standard. So if you're looking at having this incredibly flexible and scalable solution based on containers, and you can literally run it anywhere, then Kubernetes is frankly an obvious choice. However, it's also really complicated. Anybody who's going to try and tell you that Kubernetes is not complicated is either super genius, possibly ill-informed, or just giving you bad advice. Kubernetes is complicated. That's where the cloud comes in. Okay, Azure Kubernetes, the question that was actually asked. Azure Kubernetes is a platform, mostly platform as a service offering that dramatically simplifies the deployment of Kubernetes. Okay, so you want Kubernetes, but you don't necessarily want to have to do all of the management that goes into Kubernetes as an entity unto itself, right? You want to concentrate on your workload. You can't just forget about Kubernetes, but what Azure Kubernetes does is it says, okay, Azure wants you to host that workload in Azure, and they're just making it easier for you. AWS has a similar concept, Elastic Kubernetes Service, and frankly, Google invented Kubernetes. It was a Google thing before they open sourced it. So you have the same thing there. But the whole point is to take this absolutely awesome concept and make it easier to use. So sorry, you gave me an opportunity to geek out there. Couldn't help it. Hope that makes some sense to you. All right, back to some discipline here. Okay. Let's see, 2 questions. What's the difference between, this one's really easy, from Lily, what's the difference between AZ 104 and AZ 103? Is it different versions? Easiest question of the day, yes. AZ 104 is just an updated version of AZ 103. That was easy. That one's done. All right. Will you be covering, from Julio Castillo, will you be covering SCCM installs in Azure? So right now, I'm not laughing because that's a bad question. That's a deep question. I will tell you right now, we don't have any plans to cover that. That is something that is powerful, but that is also something that may not have a super wide audience, quite honestly. And look, do me a favor, and I didn't put up any of my contact information. We'll put that up. Reach out to me. It's pretty simple. twallace@ine.com if you want to send me an email. You can also reach out to me. You can find me pretty easily on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Tracy Wallace Tech, TEC. Send me a note on that. And look, honestly, we have a course request process, and I'll put that into the course request process so that, if we get some demand for that, there's no reason we couldn't do it. Honestly, it's not in the plans right at the moment. All right. I've got another one. Okay, I get to use whiteboard again. I've heard about the hybrid cloud, but not exactly how it works. Could you help me to explain it in concept? Absolutely. Hybrid cloud is awesome. It's awesome for competing reasons. One, it's a buzzword that everybody, well, there's kind of 3 reasons. One, it's a buzzword that everybody's concerned about knowing about, and I know what it is, so that gives me an advantage. But 2, it is a seriously common workload scenario architecture. And 3, and this is the best part, is don't tell anyone, but it's really actually super easy. Okay, let's talk about hybrid cloud here for a sec. Okay, we're going to go back to the whiteboard. Again, just super simplistic. Try not to waste too much of anyone's time here. But okay, if I think about the cloud, I have this great big thing over here called the cloud. Oh, it took my C. That's a victory right there. Okay, I've got the cloud. There's a pretty good chance that I have something on premises. Now, you might not, right? You might be a cloud-only environment. There are companies, absolutely, that really just have a cloud presence. Totally cool. But in a lot of cases, you've got on premises, and you've got some machines over here on premises, right? You've got some servers running on premises. You've got some users on premises, and you also probably have some resources in clouds. You might have virtual machines. Since this is Azure, I can say virtual machines instead of worrying about whether or not it's EC2. You might also have some services running in Azure. So I might have a MySQL database running in Azure. Okay, so that might be MySQL. Azure, it's actually called an Azure DB for MySQL. Now, I can have these two environments that are acting independently, or I could set up some kind of connectivity. I could have, say, a VPN device on premises. I could have a virtual network over here in Azure. That's a VNet. And I could put up a VPN gateway over here and set up communications, right? And so here I have a VPN tunnel. And at this point, what that means is if this user here needs to run something against that virtual machine there, it should be, that is a terrible arrow, but it should be absolutely transparent to the user that this virtual machine is over here rather than over here. Likewise, this server here needs to access data. It's going to access that database as though that database is sitting right here, right? And in a real sense, that's what hybrid cloud is. Now, think about a WAN technology, wide area network, topology, excuse me, right? Honestly, this is no different than a wide area network topology, a WAN topology. And what I tell people, when you think about hybrid cloud, right, from a connectivity standpoint, there's two things here, so I don't get any cloud providers coming in and chasing me with pitchforks. There's two things. From a connectivity, from a networking standpoint, your hybrid topology is a WAN topology. It's just that there's this other data center that you don't own, right? It's in the cloud. Now, there are some limitations there, right? And I say this, and if you think about VPN and you say that black box is it, then it's absolutely true. Now, I mean, there are certain things like certain networking topologies that you're not going to use on the cloud that you may use on-prem, but essentially the analogy holds. Now, there is something that gets a little interesting when we talk about hybrid cloud, and that is the things such as this right here, right? Platform as a service, or generally speaking, cloud management. Right? The tools that I use to manage these things that are in the cloud, okay? Those are a little different, right? I don't have the concept of necessarily, going into my on-prem environment, clicking a button saying, hey, I would very much like a MySQL database. Please just go create this for me, right? Which I can do in the cloud environment, right? With platform as a service. That's kind of conceptually, again, extremely big picture, what you kind of think of, right? I want something, I can click a button, cloud gives it to me, it's fantastic, okay? So from a management standpoint, from an administrative standpoint, there are differences in the way that you administer your resources that are cloud resources in a hybrid environment, okay? Now, one of the things that the different vendors, both cloud vendors and also third-party vendors, are looking to build are management tools that are hybrid cloud management tools. And I know I'm Azure person. Azure has something called Azure Arc that I have to tell you, a year and a half ago, when I went to Microsoft Ignite conference and they were talking about Arc, I was totally excited about it. And I did a webinar on it. And as I was building the content for the webinar, I realized this was so not useful yet. And they've made improvements actually since then, and it's probably a little bit more useful. But I would say if you're familiar with networking, the connectivity aspect of hybrid cloud is certainly conceptually consistent with what you might think of as WAN. Only you don't own all the data centers. Administratively, operationally, you are potentially using a different tool set, particularly if you're doing things like platform as a service, but also the way that you provision resources in the cloud. But a lot of things, let's say, for example, you use management tools like Puppet or Chef or Ansible. Honestly, those are going to work exactly the same, whether you're doing things with on-premises resources or, let's say, virtual machines in the cloud. So hopefully that gives you some information on what that concept of hybrid cloud is. All right, let's see. Do we have anything else? Right now, I did get a comment on the chat. Google Cloud is the only one officially supported by EVE-NG last time I checked. That's cool. Hope to see Azure and AWS supported soon. Fair. And I know enough to say EVE-NG is this really cool I know it's used for labs a lot, for networking side. So I'm not an expert in that, but I know that is a very popular tool. Okay, right now I believe that I have exhausted the queue of questions. So if you have more questions, feel free to throw them in. And if you have a question and you really don't want me to go off on a tangent, drawing it out on the whiteboard and making bad C's, you can just put that, say, hey, just answer the question. Don't go all crazy about it. I'll be more than happy to do that. So let me know. Otherwise, I'll just kind of hang out here for at least the next 21 minutes. What are the advantages of serverless? Interesting, you listed as ETL, which this is a question that's coming in from Facebook. Got a couple of questions popped in. I just had to have that awkward silence to get them in. So sorry. First question from Don Beck. What is the cost for an INE on-demand subscription? Great question. Let's take a look. So if I go up here, and I know the answer, by the way, but shameless plug here. Okay, so if we go to INE.com, now I'm probably going to get made fun of for, there we go, plans and pricing. I was like, hopefully I'll find this really quickly. Okay, so here are our pricing. Okay, we have for coming into our site 3 different plans. We have a monthly plan, very simple, $49 a month. Annualized, it's going to be $499, so you're saving 15%. I did that math off the top of my head. Either that or I looked at the little banner that says save 15%. And then we have the premium, which right now is an annual subscription. It is a bit more expensive, but if we go down here, it comes with a whole lot more. So what I'm going to do is I will put this into the chat. I send that. If you are interested, there we go. I got a great Q&A there. All right, so there is the link to our different offerings. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the question from Facebook, from Scott Cedarbaum. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. What are the advantages of serverless ETL tools like Lambda or Data Factory? Okay, so Data Factory, this is absolutely something in ETL over using scripts in a platform like EC2. Okay, now that's interesting because talk about Lambda, which is an AWS thing, versus Data Factory, which I assume you're talking about the Data Factory in Azure, versus EC2. Cool. Okay. Here's the thing when it comes to serverless. Serverless is a term that I both love and hate. Okay. I actually really love it. I just like to make fun of it because nothing is actually serverless. hate to tell you, there's still a server underneath. But big picture, okay, the simplest way to differentiate this, and there's two advantages for me of serverless, and we'll get to those, but we'll get to both of them. The first one is that you're looking at a very different pricing scheme, okay? If you have an EC2 or virtual machine, when you provision that, so EC2 is Elastic Compute Cloud, which is what you have in AWS. Virtual machine is what you have in Azure. Okay, you are going to provision that based on a size, and that size is going to define things like what's your how many virtual CPUs, what size virtual CPU, what's the performance of the virtual CPU, how much memory, what's the size in the case of Azure, what's the size of potentially your temporary disk. Okay, and you are paying for capacity. I'm not going to tell you how long I've been doing this and how much that C gets me. There we go. You're paying for capacity, right? You're specifying a size, whether you need that or not. And in fact, what you're always going to do is you're always going to oversize a little bit, right? Because it's better to pay for a little too much size than not have all the power that you need to perform whatever it is you need to do. Now, there's things that you do to mitigate this, right? I say, hey, you know what? I'm going to create, instead of creating one massive EC2 or VM, I'm going to create and scale. So I have a whole bunch of little ones running. So I can start and stop little ones, and it's closer to exactly what I need. But you're still, at the end of the day, paying for capacity. Okay, with serverless, with a Lambda or a function app, depending on which platform, okay, what you're paying for is consumption. That's my C right there. Okay, I go and I can write my code and I can deploy my code as a function app in Azure, or I can deploy it as a Lambda in AWS. And until that code actually runs and does something, I pay nothing. In fact, in most of your platforms, you actually have a pretty fair bit of run that you can do in a month and still not pay anything. I'm not going to go into the pricing, but that's the huge difference. That's a primary difference from an architectural standpoint, is that you are moving from a capacity-based to a consumption-based model. Now, you also mentioned something called Data Factory. Data Factory is a service. Now, I'm going to talk about Data Factory as it applies in Azure. Okay, Data Factory is a service that is designed to do ETL, extract, transform, and load in a cloud environment. So you're going to take data, you got some data source over here, put it through Data Factory, and it's going to go to some endpoint. Okay, and you configure it. Now, this is platform as a service. Okay, and with platform as a service, you have to kind of be careful when you look at it, because some platform as a service offerings are based on capacity and some are based on consumption. Okay. And so they serve as serverless. And I believe, and this is off the top of my head, actually, you know what? Let's do a quick look. Azure. Pricing. See how this is priced out, because I don't remember off the top of my head, but we have this thing called the internet. So, all right, there you go. Notice the pricing, data pipelines. Now, what's interesting is that the pipelines are consumption-based, or $1 per 1,000 activities run. If you're using integration services, then it is capacity-based. You're running on a per hour basis. Okay, so there you go. The other advantage, by the way, of serverless and platform as a service, the second advantage is that you are managing less. You are focusing on your workload. Okay, so when I have a Lambda or a function app, I've got some code that's sitting in that, right? But that is pretty much the only thing I'm focusing on. I don't have to worry about the underlying virtual machine. I don't have to worry about the underlying EC2. I don't have to worry about the operating system. Even the hosting platform, all I have to focus on is my actual workload. And that's roughly true for platform as a service as well. You're not worrying about what that data factory is running on. You're worried about your workload. Okay. Great question there. Hopefully that gives you a reasonable answer. All right. I did get a great suggestion from Mark Thompson that I believe bears repeating when I was sitting there with that silence, is that could have been playing elevator music or talk about any new concepts in the cloud. Definitely would have gone with the elevator music. And I'm going to ask the INE folks to see if we can kind of make sure that we hook that up. And I'm not talking about, modern elevator music that I'm sad to say I recognize most everything that is current elevator music when I go into the grocery store. I'm talking about the super horrible elevator music of my youth, like in the 1980s. So if we could work on something with that, and I'm looking at you, Adam, because I feel like that would be something that you could do. Is an amazing producer. Okay, so there we go. That covers that. I'm going to go ahead and say that I answered that one live. Okay. So somebody said, can you describe VNets? I'm not laughing about that. That's a great question. But they follow that with, we liked you before we knew you drove a Kia. I'm hurt by that. Personally, I feel attacked, but we're good. No, let's go ahead and let's talk about that. Man, I did not think that I would be getting to do this much whiteboarding. So here's the thing, VNets, and by the way, we've got content that covers this at INE. Again, it's actually on the starter pass. I'm pretty sure I look at that in the AZ 900 coverage when I talk about the fundamentals of what a VNet virtual network is. Okay, so virtual network is, well, a virtual network. Okay, I have this thing called a VNet. Okay, within the VNet, I have subnets. Okay, and attached to the subnets via network interfaces, I have virtual machines. So if I have a virtual machine, I have a VNet. Simple as that. You cannot have a virtual machine running in Azure that is not associated with a VNet through a network interface. I'm gonna put NIC because I'm old. And anytime I think network interface, I think network interface card, but it's not physically a card. It's just a network interface. Now, my subnets, so this is a subnet. Okay, any machines that I've got in a VNet that are attached to the subnet, any subnet in that VNet, they can all communicate. Okay, so by default, within a VNet, I've got communication. At the subnet level, I'm setting an IP address range. I'll just say IP ADD. Okay, I'm setting that for the subnet. I can also set up what's called a network security group, or NSG. Think firewall rules, very, very basic firewall. And I can also set up routing. So if I want to override the default routing, I can do that at the subnet level. At the VNet level, there's a few things I set up. Basically, I set the overall IP range or ranges within which all of the subnets have to fall. And I can also configure DNS. A couple other things, but those are really the big things that you would typically do at the virtual network level. All right, and then I can have multiple virtual networks in Azure. Those virtual networks by default do not communicate, or well, they don't communicate, but the virtual machines on them cannot communicate unless I set up a peering or VPN connection, but it would always be peering. Also on the VNet, if I am setting up VPN, we'll put up a VPN gateway. And again, there's a couple other things that are associated with a virtual network, but that's pretty much what a virtual network is. And I feel like perhaps I'm now giving away all of the content that I worked very hard to produce for INE. But come take a look. We actually do go into more depth, but that's the big picture. All right. Now, one more question here that I see. How does Active Directory work in Azure? Okay, now I am not going to whiteboard this one out, okay, but I will tell you, all right, here's how it works. And this is something that is a fairly common misunderstanding that people have, okay? So we have within the Microsoft environment, and we have had since literally Windows 2000, this thing called Active Directory. Most people are familiar with Active Directory. Okay, it is a system for maintaining primarily identity and login. It does more. It's a database. Okay, that's probably not giving it full credit for all the things that it does. It integrates with Exchange if you're still using that on-prem, and somebody mentioned SCCM, which is, by the way, System Center Configuration Manager. It integrates. There's a lot of things that integrate with it, a lot of tools that integrate with it. But at the end of the day, it's a big database of users, and it uses specific protocols. Okay, so it uses things like Kerberos. It uses other networking layer protocols that are specific to Active Directory. That's the on-premises. That's what's been around since 2000. Okay, now in the cloud, in Azure, we still have users, we still have identities, we still have rights that need to be assigned. And so what Microsoft did to manage the users that are in the cloud is they created Azure Active Directory, which it's both good and bad that it's kind of the same name. It's a little bit bad because people think, oh, it's just the same thing. Honestly, when I first saw it, I was like, awesome. All this Active Directory stuff that's been around for 13 years at the time just got moved into Azure. Not what it is. Okay, Azure is the cloud. Azure Active Directory is very much the cloud version of what you have with on-premises. Very much cut down, doesn't do nearly as much stuff as on-premises Active Directory does. Okay, but what it does is it uses web protocols and web standards. So things like OAuth, things like OpenID, these standards that are out there that are not Microsoft standards, certainly not Azure standards. They're common standards for things like authentication and authorization. Okay, that's what Azure Active Directory is built on. Okay, is those standards, right? It does kind of similar things. Like I said, a little bit cut down. So if you've got Azure and you have users, you're doing things. So in order for me to create something in Azure, okay, I have to have a user account in an associated Azure Active Directory, what's called a tenant or directory. Okay, and so I do that, and I use role-based access control, or RBAC or RBAC, to control what my users who are defined in Azure AD can do in Azure. But Azure's not the only cloud-based system that uses Azure AD, because again, it's based on these cloud standards, right? These web-based standards, so it can be used anywhere. You may have heard of a little product. It's technically called Microsoft 365, but most people know it as Office 365. If you are using Office 365, then you are using Azure AD. It is dependent upon Azure AD. There's no other way to set up its authentication. Well, you can integrate other things, and I'll get to that in a second. There are also, last I checked, honestly, I haven't looked at this number in well over a year, so it's much higher than this. There's over 3,000 different web-based applications that can integrate authentication from Azure AD. Okay, so simple as that. I mean, things such as, ironically, Salesforce, Dynamics 365, which is another Microsoft product, to things like, when I demonstrate this, always like taking a look. There are multiple different construction, building construction applications that integrate. Not that that's any way better or worse. I just think it's cool because that's a pretty niche application that's using Azure AD. The other thing really quickly is that Azure AD also allows you to synchronize your on-premises users into the Azure environment, right? So, if you have a combination of on-premises logins and on-premises applications, but your users are also using things like Office 365, Microsoft 365, Dynamics, Salesforce, one of those supported construction applications, then your users aren't going to have to maintain two sets of identities. Okay, it also integrates with federation systems, whether it's Microsoft or third-party federation systems. So, it can be completely transparent to the user that, they're actually, whatever application they're using, whatever web-based application they're using is actually relying on Azure AD. As far as they know, they just opened up their browser, they went to it, they were logged in as themselves. So that is what Azure AD is.